A boot kicked through a wooden door. The hinges splintered. Wood cracked across a dirt floor. A lantern swung wide and cast yellow light over something that should not have been alive. Hands reached up, small, twisted hands, bent the wrong way. A voice tried to speak and couldn't shape the words. 19 men stood frozen in that doorway. Doctors. Each of them had cut into bodies, set bones, watched men die. None of them moved. One of them dropped his bag. His hands shook so hard he couldn't pick it up. His name was Henry Ashcroft, the youngest of the group, and what he saw never left him. The oldest doctor said one sentence very quietly. "We never speak of this," and for 120 years no one did. What those 19 saw in that hollow has never reached the world. Stay with me on this one. Now let me take you back a few weeks before that door came down. Before any of those men ever set foot on that mountain. Boston, spring of 1903. A young doctor named Henry Ashcroft was bent over a child in a charity clinic on Hanover Street. The child had a fever that wouldn't break. Henry had been on his feet for 16 hours. His coat smelled like carbolic acid and sweat. He was 28 years old. He had been a doctor for 3 years. He had buried more children in those 3 years than he had ever expected to in a lifetime. That was the kind of doctor Henry was. Not a society man. Not a researcher. The kind who worked in the part of the city where the rent was cheap and the patients couldn't pay. He had a wife named Margaret and a son named Daniel, 2 years old, with his mother's dark eyes. He worked nights at the clinic and afternoons at a small private practice that barely covered the bills. He was tired all the time and he loved the work anyway. Now here's the thing. Henry had a mentor. A man named Dr. Edmund Pemberton. Pemberton was 64 years old, silver-haired, well-dressed, the kind of doctor whose name appeared in newspapers when wealthy patients survived difficult surgeries. He had seen something in Henry years before, when Henry was still a medical student. He had paid for part of Henry's tuition. He had written letters of recommendation. He had told Henry more than once that Henry was the kind of doctor the profession needed. Henry believed him. That matters. Hold on to that. It was Pemberton who came to the clinic that spring afternoon. He waited until Henry finished with the child. He sat down on a wooden chair in the corner of the examination room and watched his protege wash his hands. "Henry," he said, "I have an opportunity for you." Henry dried his hands on a rough towel and turned around. Pemberton was holding an envelope. "The Carrollton Medical Society," Pemberton said, "is sending an expedition into the mountains of West Virginia. There is a community there. Isolated. Inbred for generations by all accounts. The people are afflicted with deformities of a sort that have never been catalogued. The society wants a complete medical record. Photographs, measurements, tissue samples where possible. 19 doctors will go. I have nominated you as the 20th. Henry blinked at him. "Why me?" he asked. Pemberton smiled. "Because you have steady hands and a quiet manner. Because you do not flinch. And because the work will be hard, and most of the senior men will not want to do it themselves." Henry didn't answer right away. The truth was, he had never been on an expedition. He had never been outside of Massachusetts. The idea of traveling into the mountains, of seeing something no medical journal had ever printed, struck a deep chord in him. He thought about his wife. He thought about his son. He thought about the rent. "How long?" he asked. 3 weeks. Possibly 4. The society will pay your fee. $200 plus all expenses. $200 was 4 months' rent. Henry stared at the envelope. I'll need to speak with Margaret, he said. Pemberton handed him the envelope. Speak with her tonight. We leave Friday. Stay with that for a second. Pemberton told him there would be 19 doctors. The expedition was set. The travel arrangements were made. The roster was complete. Pemberton was offering Henry a seat that had already been carved out for him. Henry did not think about that then. Years later, he would think about almost nothing else. He went home that night. He kissed his sleeping son. He sat at the kitchen table with Margaret and showed her the envelope. Margaret read it twice. She was a practical woman. She did not love the idea of him being gone for a month. But $200 was $200. Go, she said. But Henry, be careful. It's a medical expedition, Margaret. I know what it is. Just promise me you'll be careful. He promised her. He kept the promise as long as he could. Friday came. Henry packed his medical bag, 2 clean shirts, his notebook, and a small daguerreotype of Margaret and Daniel. He took the early train to South Station and met the rest of the expedition at the platform. This is the part where you start meeting the men who would, in a few weeks' time, stand frozen in that doorway with him. The eldest was Dr. Cornelius Goddard. 71 years old, white-bearded, walked with a silver-tipped cane, eyes the color of cold tea. He was a former dean of the Carrollton Medical College. He was the most respected man on the platform. The other doctors lowered their voices when he spoke. When Pemberton introduced Henry, Goddard looked at him for a long moment without smiling. Boston Charity Clinic, Goddard said. Pemberton has spoken of you. It's an honor, sir. Goddard nodded once and turned away. The next was Dr. Lawrence Reeve, 45, lecturer in anatomy, sharp-faced, a man who liked to talk and liked to be the loudest voice in any room. He shook Henry's hand and immediately asked who Henry's father had been. My father was a printer, Henry said. Reeve raised his eyebrows and let go of Henry's hand. Well, I'm sure you'll be useful taking notes. Then there was Dr. Silas Halloway. Henry would come to remember Halloway above all the others. Halloway was 53 years old, tall, thin, gray-eyed, very quiet. He shook Henry's hand and said only, "Welcome," but he held Henry's eye for a beat too long. Like he was looking for something. Like he was deciding something. Henry did not understand that look until much later. There were 16 others. I will not give you all their names yet, because most of them blur in Henry's notes from that first day. They were physicians from Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Hartford. Some were surgeons. Some were specialists in skeletal abnormalities. 2 were photographers as well as doctors. They were, by any honest measure, an extraordinary group of men. The kind of group you only assemble when something matters very much to someone with money. The train pulled out of South Station at 8:30 in the morning. They rode south through Connecticut, through New York, through Pennsylvania, into the long, slow climb toward the Appalachian foothills. They changed trains in Pittsburgh. They changed again in Charleston, West Virginia. By the time they reached the small railhead at a town called Pine Hollow, 3 days had passed, and Henry was beginning to feel the distance from Margaret like a weight in his chest. At Pine Hollow, they were met by a man named James Farrell. Farrell was a thick-shouldered farmer in a wool coat, beard streaked with gray. He had 4 wagons waiting for them, hitched to mules, drivers smoking pipes on the wagon boxes. Farrell did not introduce himself with much warmth. "You're the doctors," he said. It was not a question. "We are," Goddard said. Farrell looked them over. His eyes went from Goddard to Reeve to Holloway. They lingered for a moment on Henry, the youngest. Then he nodded like a man making peace with something. "Climb on," he said. "It's a half day to Briar Ridge. We'll be there before dark." The wagons climbed. The road became a track. The track became a trail. The forest closed in. Henry had never seen woods like this, black walnut and chestnut and oak older than the country itself, the kind of trees you only see where no one has lived for a long time, or where the people who lived there did not cut. About 4 hours into the climb, the wagon stopped at a small village that was not Briar Ridge. A scatter of cabins along a creek. 24 people, maybe. Farrell got down to water the mules. The doctors got down to stretch. That was when Henry heard the cough. A child was sitting on the porch of one of the cabins, wrapped in a quilt. Maybe 4 years old. The cough was wet and deep and constant. A woman stood next to the child, watching the wagons, her face flat with worry. Reeve walked past Henry and said over his shoulder, "Don't get involved, Ashcroft. We're not here for these people. Save your hands for the work." Henry looked at Reeve. Then he looked at the child. He went to the porch. Believe me when I tell you, this small moment is the moment that bought Henry his seat on the expedition. Not Pemberton's letter. Not the $200. This. He knelt down. He spoke to the woman in a low voice. He put his ear to the child's chest. He listened. He felt the child's neck. He looked into the child's mouth. He stood up, opened his bag, and took out a small bottle of expectorant and a packet of willow bark powder. He showed the woman how much to give and how often. He told her to keep the child warm and to make her drink as much water as she could. He pressed $2 into the woman's hand. He told her if the cough got worse to send for a doctor in Pine Hollow. The woman stared at him. "There's no doctor in Pine Hollow," she said. Henry didn't have an answer for that. He nodded once and walked back to the wagons. Goddard was watching him from the lead wagon. So was Holloway. Reeve had already climbed back onto his seat and was looking the other way. "That was kind of you, Doctor." "Ashcroft," Goddard said. "It was nothing, sir." It was something. Goddard's tea-colored eyes held him for a moment. "Climb up. We are losing the light." Henry climbed up. The wagons rolled on. That night when they made camp at a clearing 2 miles short of Briar Ridge, Holloway came and sat next to Henry by the fire. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "You did good with that child today." "I did what any doctor would do." "No," Holloway said. "Oh, you didn't." He looked at Henry for a moment longer, and then he stood up and walked away into the dark. "I want to pause here because I want to talk to you for a second. If you are still with me, and I hope you are, because we are just getting to the part of this story that has stayed buried for over 100 years, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want more stories like this one. The ones the history books skipped. The ones somebody tried to bury. That is what I do here, and I can only keep doing it if you tell me to keep doing it. Tap the button. Let me know you're listening. And then come right back because we are almost at Briar Ridge, and once we get there, nothing is going to be the same. The next morning, the wagons rolled the last 2 miles. The trees opened up. Henry leaned forward on the wagon seat to see. Briar Ridge sat in a hollow ringed by mountains on three sides. A creek ran through the center of the hollow. Maybe 40 cabins. Smoke from chimneys. A small white church on a rise to the east. A schoolhouse next to the church. Cornfields on the lower slopes. It looked at first glance like any other mountain settlement in that part of the country. It was not. The people came out to meet the wagons. They came out slowly in twos and threes from doorways and from the fields. Henry counted maybe 30 of them at first. Then more. Then more. He had been told to expect deformity. He had read the brief Pemberton had given him on the train. Inbred isolation. Skeletal abnormalities. Facial asymmetries. He had prepared himself. He had not prepared himself. A man walked toward the wagon with one shoulder 6 inches lower than the other, and a hand that ended in 2 long fused fingers. A woman behind him held a baby whose skull was visibly soft and uneven. 2 boys ran past the wagons, laughing. One of them had no hair anywhere on his body, not on his head, not on his eyebrows, his skin pale as paper. An old woman stood in a doorway whose eyes had no color in them at all, whitish gray, like fog. Henry felt his stomach turn over. Not from the deformities themselves. From the pattern. There was a pattern. He did not have words for it yet. But something in him, the part of a doctor that recognizes things before the mind catches up, was already moving. A man came forward to meet the wagons. He was thin and tall, 60 years old or so, in a black coat and a flat-brimmed black hat. He did not have any visible deformity at all. His face was lined and steady. He took off his hat as he reached the lead wagon. "Doctors," he said, "I'm Brother Tull. I am the pastor here. We have been expecting you. Please, come down. We have prepared the schoolhouse for your work." Goddard climbed down first. Then Rave. Then the rest. Henry was the last to climb down, his bag in his hand. He stood in the dirt of the road and looked around the hollow. James Farrell was standing next to his wagon. He was looking at Henry. He waited until the other doctors had walked toward Brother Tull and the schoolhouse. Then he stepped close. "You're the youngest one, aren't you?" Farrell said. It wasn't really a question. "I am." Farrell nodded slowly. He looked off toward the mountains. Then he looked back at Henry, and what he said next, Henry would remember word for the rest of his life. "You're not the first ones who came," Farrell said. "Just so you know. You're the 3rd group of doctors that's been up here in 30 years. Both the others wrote reports. We never saw any of them." He paused. "Don't lose your soul up here, son." He walked away to tend his mules. Henry stood in the road for a long moment, the bag heavy in his hand. The schoolhouse door was open. The other doctors were already inside. Brother Tull was waiting in the doorway, watching him. Henry walked toward the schoolhouse. He did not know it yet, but he had crossed the line. Whatever Briar Ridge was, he was inside it now. And the work was about to begin. The schoolhouse had been cleared for them. Desks pushed against one wall. 3 long tables set up along the other. Lamps, buckets of water, clean cloths. Brother Tull had thought of everything. The doctors set up their stations. Goddard at the head table. Reeve next to him. Holloway in the corner. Henry was given a small table near the window. Brother Tull stood in the front of the room and explained the order of things. We will bring them to you in family groups, he said. Eldest first. The young ones get scared if they go in front of the old ones. We will keep them coming all day if you need. The people have been told you are here to help. They have been told to answer your questions truthfully. They will. Goddard nodded. We will need to make notes. Take measurements. Sometimes we will need to take samples of skin or hair. Will they consent to that? They will consent to whatever I tell them is necessary. That answer should have struck Henry. He wrote it down later in his notebook and circled it, whatever I tell them. Brother Tull had a great deal of authority in that hollow. More than a pastor usually has. Hold on to that. It comes back later. The work began. The first family came in. A grandfather, a son, a grandson. 3 generations. Henry's job was to record. He moved between the tables, taking notes for the senior doctors, copying their measurements into a master ledger. By the second hour, he had developed a system. By the third hour, his hand was cramping. By the fourth hour, something had begun to bother him. It was a pattern in the bodies. The grandfather of that first family, 76 years old, thin, slightly stooped, had almost no visible deformities. A bit of curvature in the spine. A mild tremor in the left hand. Nothing dramatic. He had lived a long life. He told Reeve he had been born in the hollow and had never left it. His parents had been born there too. The son, 51 years old, had a missing tooth gap that was unusual. 6 missing teeth in the front of his upper jaw. His left ear was smaller than his right. 2 of his fingers on his left hand were fused at the second joint. More noticeable than his father, but still mild. The grandson was 23 years old. He had a cleft palate that had never been repaired. His left arm ended at the elbow. His skin was patchy white in places. He could not hear out of one ear. Stay with me. Write those 3 again. Grandfather almost normal. Son mildly affected. Grandson severely affected. That is not how generational genetic isolation works. Inbreeding does not get worse generation by generation in a steady arrow. It produces variability. Some children are affected. Some are not. The pattern across a population is scattered, random. What Henry was seeing was not scatter. It was a slope, a line going one direction. The young were worse than the old. By the end of the first day, he had recorded 11 family groups. The pattern held in 9 of them. In the other 2, the family had moved into the hollow within the last 40 years from outside. Those families had healthier children. There was something else that bothered him too. The geographic spread of the worst cases. Henry had a rough map of the hollow in the back of his notebook. He had been marking each cabin with the family that lived there. As he sat at his small table the night of the second day, he noticed that the cabins along the creek, the ones nearest the water, held the families with the most severe cases. The cabins on the higher ground, away from the creek, held the milder ones. It was not a perfect pattern, but it was there. He drew a circle on his map around the cabins along the creek. He counted. 17 of the worst 20 cases lived in that circle. A doctor sees patterns. That is half the job. Henry had a pattern now in time and a pattern now in space. Children worse than parents. Creekside worse than upland. Both lines pointing one direction. On the second day, a young mother brought her infant in. The infant was 3 months old. It could not lift its head. Its eyes did not track. Its skin was a color Henry had no name for, a kind of ashen lavender. The mother said her older child, a little girl of 4, had been born the same way and had died at 14 months. I had a sister-in-law, the mother said quietly, who lived up the ridge. Higher up. She had 3 children. They were all fine. All 3 of them were fine. The water, Henry said, almost to himself. Where do you take your water? From the creek, right behind the cabin. And your sister-in-law. Spring on the ridge. She did not understand the question. She had no reason to. But Henry wrote it in the ledger. On the 3rd day, Reeve came over to Henry's table at noon and looked over his shoulder at the chart and the map. Reeve was not a stupid man. He saw what was on the page. His face did not change. Interesting drawings, Ashcroft. Yes, sir. Speculative, of course. Of course. Reeve looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked away. That night Henry went back to the small cabin he had been given, lit a lamp, and sat with his notebook for a long time. He drew a chart. Age on one axis, severity on the other. The line was unmistakable. Something was happening in the hollow that was not present 40 or 50 years ago. Something that was getting worse, not better. Something that was hitting the children hardest, because children's bodies are still being built, and whatever it was getting into the building. He did not write the word in his notebook that night, but he was already thinking it. Poison. Now I want you to understand what kind of doctor Henry was. He was trained in Boston in the 1890s. He had read about the lead poisoning of factory workers. He had read about mercury and the hatters who went mad from it. He had read the early papers on industrial toxicity that were just starting to circulate in American medicine. He was young enough to know about these things. The senior doctors on that expedition, the men in their 50s, 60s, 70s, they were trained in a medicine that did not yet have those words. Or they were trained to forget them. The next morning, the work continued. By the 3rd day, Henry's chart had grown to include 40 family groups. The line was still there. Steeper, in fact, now that he had more data. On the 4th day, he asked Brother Tull if he could speak with the oldest woman in the hollow. Tull thought about that for a moment. Then he nodded. Sarah Pell. She is 86 years old. She lives alone in a cabin on the east side of the creek. I will take you to her after we finish today. Henry told no one else. He finished his work for the day. As the sun started to drop, he walked with Brother Tull along the creek to a cabin he had not seen before. Smoke rose from the chimney. A garden grew along one side, well tended. Sarah Pell was sitting on the porch in a rocking chair, knitting. She was small. Her hair was white. Her hands were thin and quick. She looked up when they came down the path, and her eyes were clear and sharp and a deep blue. She was, as far as Henry could see, completely undeformed. Sister Sarah, Brother Tull said. This is Dr. Ashcroft. He has questions for you. Sarah Pell looked at Henry. She did not get up. You are not like the others, she said. Ma'am, the other doctors. They do not look at me the way you do. Sit down. Henry sat on the porch step. Brother Tull stayed standing a few feet away, watching the path. Sister Sarah, Henry said, I am trying to understand what has happened to your people. May I ask you about your life? She nodded once. You were born here, in this cabin, in 1817, and you have never left. I have never left this hollow in 86 years. Your parents, were they born here? My father was. My mother came from over the ridge when she was 19. Your brothers and sisters. How many? 7. 5 lived to grow up. Were they like you? They were like me. Strong, plain, whole. Henry leaned forward. Sister Sarah, the children today, the young ones in the hollow, were they like you when you were a child? Sarah Pell stopped knitting. She set her work down in her lap. She looked at Henry, and the clear blue eyes filled with something that was not quite tears, but was close to it. No, she said. No, child. They were not. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, when I was a girl, this hollow was the prettiest place in the mountain. 40 families. Healthy children. My brother could outrun a deer. My sister had hair the color of corn silk. We were not rich. We did not have much. But we were whole. What changed? She looked away from him. She looked up the valley toward the western mountains. In 1873, she said, they built the works. What works? Up at the head of the valley. 6 miles up. Past the bend. They built a big building. Then more buildings. They brought in men from outside. They cut a road. They cut the trees. They dug a hole in the side of the mountain bigger than 10 of our cabins put together. What was it for? They never said. Not to us. It made smoke. The smoke came down the valley when the wind blew east. The smoke smelled like rotten eggs and like something sweet that wasn't sweet. It made my eyes water. It killed the corn that year on the lower fields. And the creek. She laughed. It was not a happy laugh. The creek. Yes, the creek changed too. 2 years after the works opened, the water in the creek turned the color of strong tea. My husband called it that. Tea water. We could not drink it for a year. We had to walk up to the springs on the ridge and carry water down in barrels. Did the water clear? It cleared. After a while, it went back to looking like water. But it was never the same. And the children who were born after the works came, they started to come out wrong. She paused. She picked up her knitting. She did not look at Henry. My daughter Esther, she said, had 3 children. The first was born in 1875. He had no chin. He died in his sleep at 1 month old. The second was born in 1877. She had a hole in her back the size of a coin. She lived 4 years. The third was born in 1880. He was whole. He grew up. He is the man you saw yesterday. The one who is missing 2 fingers and cannot hear on his left side. That is whole in this valley now. Henry could not speak for a moment. Sister Sarah, he said finally. The works, are they still there? Up the valley. They closed 20 years ago. The building is still there. Empty. The road is grown over. The hole in the mountain is still there too. Filled with water now. Black water. We do not go up there. The pastor before Brother Tull, he said the place was cursed. He told us not to go. The pastor before Brother Tull. What was his name? She looked at him sharply. Pastor Whitlock. Where is he now? She held his eyes. He died in 1883. Hunting. They said it was an accident. Sister Sarah. Did Pastor Whitlock ever try to do anything? About the works. About the children. She did not answer for a long time. Then she said Pastor Whitlock wrote letters. He wrote to a newspaper in Pittsburgh. He wrote to a man at a college, a chemist. He wrote to the governor's office in Charleston. He told me once. He showed me one of the letters before he sent it. He said, Sister Sarah, somebody has to know. Did anyone answer? 2 men came up here once. Not doctors. Other men. They spoke to Pastor Whitlock for 2 days. Then they went away. 3 months later he was dead. And after that, the pastor who came to replace him told us we should not speak of these things. He said the children were a test from God. He said the works were not our concern. Was that Brother Tull? She looked away. She did not answer. She reached into the pocket of her apron and took out a small, folded handkerchief. It was old. It was stained brown along one edge. She unfolded it on her knee. The brown stain had a pattern in it, a sort of crystalline ring. This, she said, is from the creek. From 1875. I dipped this in the water and I let it dry. I have kept it since. I do not know why. I have kept it. She folded it again slowly and pressed it into Henry's hand. Show this, she said, to someone who can do something. Brother Tull cleared his throat from the path. Doctor, we should go. The light is getting low. Henry put the handkerchief into his inside coat pocket. He thanked Sarah Pell. He stood up. He walked back along the creek with Brother Tull in silence. When they reached the schoolhouse, Holloway was standing outside. He was smoking a thin cigar. He watched Henry approach. Where have you been, Ashcroft? Speaking with one of the elders. Sister Sarah Pell. Holloway did not change his expression. But Henry saw something move in his eyes. A small thing, like a shutter closing. Henry, Holloway said quietly. Be careful what you write down. That was all he said. He flicked his cigar into the dirt and walked back inside. Now here is where the story turns. That night, just after the doctors had finished their evening meal, James Farrell came riding into the hollow on a mule. Hard. The mule was lathered. Farrell jumped down at the schoolhouse and went straight to Goddard. There's a cabin, he said. Up the creek. About 2 miles. There's something there you need to see. The man who lives there. He has a child. The child is... Farrell stopped. He looked around at the doctors. You need to see it. All of you. Tonight. Goddard frowned. It cannot wait until morning. No, sir. It cannot. Goddard looked at Brother Tull. Tull looked back at him. Something passed between them. Get the lanterns, Goddard said. All of you. We go now. The 19 of them, and you remember, Henry was the 20th, the youngest, the one Pemberton had carved a seat for. They walked up the creek in the dark. Farrell led the way with a lantern. The path was rough. The trees were thick. The creek murmured beside them. It took close to an hour to reach the cabin. It was set back from the creek, half hidden by laurel. A low cabin. 1 room. No windows on the side that faced them. A wisp of smoke rose from the chimney. Farrell stopped at the door. He won't open, Farrell said. He has not opened the door in 2 years. We bring him food. We leave it on the step. He takes it inside at night. Why does he not open the door? Goddard asked. Because of his child, Farrell said. Because he does not want anyone to see his child. Goddard was quiet for a moment. "Open it," he said. Farrell did not move. "I cannot," he said. "He is my brother." Goddard turned to Reeve. Reeve looked at the door. Then he looked at the youngest doctor present, the one whose hands were already steady from a charity clinic in Boston. "Ashcroft," Reeve said. "Open the door." Henry did not move at first. Then he stepped forward. He did not knock. He put his shoulder against the door and pushed. The door was barred from inside. He stepped back. He looked at the senior doctors. None of them spoke. He took a breath. He raised his boot and kicked. The door split. The bar inside cracked. The door swung in. The lantern in Farrell's hand swung wide and caught the inside of the cabin in yellow light. And there it was. The thing you read at the start of this story. The thing none of those 19 men ever spoke of again. The man on the floor in the corner, weeping. The small body on the bed. The hands reaching up. I will not describe it again because Henry himself, in everything he ever wrote afterward, never described it in clinical detail. He could not. He would write only that he saw a child of this hollow in its most extreme form. He would write that he saw the consequence of a poison the body cannot bear. What he did do in that doorway was open his bag, take out a vial, and ask the father if he could take a small sample of the child's hair. The father stared at him. "You're going to help him," the father said. "I'm going to try," Henry said. He cut a small lock of hair. He placed it carefully into the vial. He stoppered it. He put the vial in his coat pocket against the handkerchief from Sister Sarah. He stood up. He looked at the senior doctors. They were still in the doorway. None of them had moved. None of them had stepped inside. Goddard was the first to speak. He spoke very quietly. "We never speak of this." Reeve nodded. So did several of the others. Holloway said nothing. He was looking at Henry. Watching. The doctors turned and walked back into the dark. Henry stood for one more moment in that cabin. He told the father he would come back the next day. He did not know yet, but he would not be allowed to. He followed the lanterns down the creek. Nobody said a word the whole way back. Just 19 pairs of boots on the path and the sound of the water beside them. When they reached the schoolhouse, Goddard called everyone into the main room. He poured brandy from a glass bottle. He gave a small glass to each man. He gave Henry his last. "Drink, son," Goddard said. "It has been a hard night." Henry drank. The brandy burned down his throat. "Tomorrow," Goddard said, "we will continue the examinations. We will finish in 3 more days. We will return to Boston. The report will be written. It will say what it needs to say." He looked around the room. "Are we agreed, gentlemen?" The men murmured agreement. Henry did not. Goddard set his glass down. He came over to Henry. He put a hand on Henry's shoulder. His tea-colored eyes were warm, almost fatherly. "You did well tonight, Henry. You showed courage. You will be a fine doctor for many years." He paused. "Get some sleep, son. The morning will come." Henry nodded. He could not trust himself to speak. He walked back to his small cabin alone. He went inside. He closed the door. He did not light the lamp. He sat on the edge of the cot and listened to the wind move in the trees outside. The fire in the small stove popped once, twice. The wind eased. An owl called from the ridge. The hollow was quiet. The work was done for the night. The brandy was warm in his belly. Goddard had been kind. The bed was soft. He lay down. He put his hand against his coat pocket, against the handkerchief and the vial of hair. They were both still there. He closed his eyes. He slept. He woke up at 3 in the morning with his heart hammering. He did not know what woke him. The fire was nearly out. The cabin was cold. The wind was still moving in the trees outside, the same as before. But something was wrong. Something was different. He sat up. He reached for his coat at the foot of the cot. His coat was on the floor. He had hung it on the peg by the door before he lay down. He was certain of it. He always hung his coat on a peg. It was a habit from 20 years of hanging up coats. The coat was on the floor. His hand went to the inside pocket. The handkerchief was gone. The vial of hair was gone. His breath stopped. He got up. He lit the lamp with shaking hands. He looked through every pocket of the coat. He looked under the cot. He looked in the small bag where he kept his clean shirts. He looked through the medical bag. The handkerchief was gone. The vial was gone. His notebook was open on the small table by the door. The pages with the chart of age and severity, the map of the hollow with the circle along the creek, the notes from his interview with Sister Sarah Pell, those pages were still there. The ink was untouched, but 4 other pages were missing. Pages he had written tonight after the cabin. Pages where he had written the word poison for the first time. Pages where he had written the words industrial source and Pittsburgh chemist asterisk. Someone had been in the cabin while he slept. Someone had read his notebook. Someone had taken what could be carried easily and torn out what was most damning. Henry sat down on the cot. His mind was very clear, the way the mind sometimes goes very clear when it is too late to be afraid. He thought about the brandy. He thought about Goddard's hand on his shoulder. The warmth in the tea-colored eyes, get some sleep, son. He had been put to sleep. He was sure of it. The brandy had been dosed. He did not run. That was important. He did not panic. He sat on the cot for a long time and he thought. Then he got up, put on his coat, and went to find Holloway. Holloway's cabin was 3 doors down. There was a faint glow under the door. Henry did not knock. He pushed it open. Holloway was sitting at the table, dressed, fully awake, smoking a thin cigar. He looked up when Henry came in. He did not look surprised. "Sit down, Ashcroft. You took my notes. Sit down, Henry. Please." Henry sat down across from him. Holloway slid something across the table. The handkerchief, the vial, the 4 torn-out pages folded together. "You took them," Henry said. "I took them," Holloway said. "Yes. Why?" "Because if I had not taken them, someone else would have. And the someone else would not have given them back." Henry stared at him. "I knew the moment you came back from Sister Sarah's cabin," Holloway said quietly. "I saw the way you walked. I saw your hand against your coat pocket. I knew you had something. And I knew if you carried it back to camp tonight, you would not carry it back to Boston. They drugged me. Yes, the brandy. Goddard does this. He has done it before." Henry felt his chest go cold. "Done it before. Sit still, Henry. I have very little time. There is something happening in 2 hours that you need to see. I had to make sure you were alive in the morning. I had to make sure your notes were not in their hands. Both things are now true. But you have to listen to me very carefully now. Are you listening? Yes. At 5 o'clock this morning, the senior doctors of this expedition are meeting in a barn outside the hollow. You are not invited. Goddard will not be there at the schoolhouse when you wake up. He will tell the others he is taking a walk. The other senior men will follow him in twos and threes. They are meeting 2 men who arrived in the hollow last night by horseback. I saw those 2 men ride in. They came from the south road. They did not come up to the schoolhouse. Brother Tull rode out and met them. They are at a barn on a farm called the Crowder Place, about a mile east of here off the main path. How do you know all this? Because I have been on this expedition before, Henry. Not this one. The one before. 20 years ago. I was where you are tonight. Henry could not speak. I made the wrong choice, Henry, Holloway said. I took the brandy. I went asleep. In the morning, the report had been written without me, and I signed it. I have signed every paper they have put in front of me for 20 years. I am a coward. I am telling you this because I do not want you to be one. Who are the 2 men? I don't know yet. I am going to find out tonight. I will be at that barn before 5. I will hide in the loft. You will not come with me. You will stay here. If I am not back by sunrise, you will leave the hollow with the wagons that come at noon, and you will say nothing. You will go home to your wife and son. You will live. And if you come back. Holloway took a long pull on the cigar. He let the smoke out slowly. If I come back, you and I will decide together what to do. He stood up. Hide those things, Henry. Not in the cabin. In the woods. No, tonight. The wood pile behind your cabin. Slip them under the bottom log. Then come back inside, lie down, and pretend to sleep. If anyone comes in, you woke up cold and went to put more wood on the fire. Do you understand? Henry nodded. He could not trust himself to speak. Holloway opened the door of his cabin. He looked at Henry for a moment, the gray eyes steady, and then he stepped out into the dark. Henry did exactly as he was told. He hid the handkerchief and the vial under the bottom log of the wood pile. He folded the 4 torn pages and slipped them into the lining of his boot. He went back inside. He lay down. He did not sleep. 2 hours passed. The wind moved. The fire died. Then just before dawn, he heard the cabin door open. He did not move. It was Holloway. Holloway closed the door. He came over to the cot. He shook Henry's shoulder. Get up. Quietly. Come with me. Now. They walked through the hollow in the gray pre-dawn. Past the schoolhouse. Past the church. Out the east path that led up the ridge. Holloway walked fast, his breath making clouds in the cold air. Neither of them spoke until they were a quarter mile beyond the last cabin. I heard everything, Holloway said. Henry, I have to tell you the worst part first. Are you ready? Tell me. The report has already been written. What? The report on Briar Ridge. The medical report. The one all 19 of us are going to sign when we get back to Boston. It is already finished. It was written before we left Charleston. Goddard brought it with him in his bag. The 2 men in the barn tonight were carrying the second copy. They were here to make sure he had no questions about how to make the findings line up. Who are they? One is named Cole. He is a vice president of the Patterson Mining Company of Pittsburgh. They built the works at the head of this valley in 1873. They closed them in 1883 after a man named Whitlock started writing letters to the wrong people. Whitlock was Pastor Whitlock. He had a hunting accident. You know about Pastor Whitlock? Sister Sarah told me about him. Yes. Well, the other man, Henry, this is the part I want you to hear. The other man is the secretary of the State Medical Examining Board of West Virginia. The man who issues medical licenses. The man who can take a doctor's license away with a stroke of a pen if that doctor steps out of line. His name is Bannister. Henry stopped walking. He could not move. The medical board, he said. The medical board, Holloway said. The Patterson Mining Company has been paying the medical board for 20 years to keep doctors away from this hollow. When that does not work, they pay the medical board to send their own doctors. The Carrollton Medical Society is not really sending us, Henry. It is a cover. The expedition was assembled by Goddard at the request of Patterson and Bannister. Pemberton, Rave, all the senior men. They have all done this before in other places. They are professional barriers. Stay with me. Stay with me on this part. Because this is the moment everything changes. Up to this minute, Henry had thought he was inside one kind of story. The kind where a young doctor sees something terrible, gathers his evidence, returns to civilization, and tells the world. The kind where the medical profession, the courts, the press, somebody does the right thing once they know. But the medical profession was not going to do the right thing. The medical profession had written the lie before he ever boarded the train. The institutions he had been raised to believe in, the hospitals, the medical schools, the boards, the journals, those institutions were the ones doing the burying. They were not the rescuers. They were the perpetrators. That is not a difference of degree. That is a difference of kind. What about Pemberton? Henry asked. His voice was very quiet. Holloway looked at him with great pity. Henry, who do you think recommended you for this expedition? Who do you think suggested to Goddard that the right kind of young doctor, quiet, grateful, with a wife and a child to lose, would be a useful name on the bottom of the report? Henry could not breathe. Pemberton picked you because you would sign, Holloway said. Pemberton has been picking the youngest doctor on every one of these reports for 30 years. They want the signatures. They want the youngest names. Because the youngest names will outlive everyone else. Your signature on that report, Henry, would be the signature they would still be holding up 40 years from now to prove the findings were sound. The sun was starting to come up over the ridge. The light was thin and gray. Holloway, Henry said. What do we do? I do not know yet. I have been a coward for 20 years. I am asking you to be braver than I was. We have until tonight to think about it. Right now, you go back to your cabin. You eat breakfast. You sit in the schoolhouse all day and you take notes. You smile. You drink the coffee Goddard gives you. And you act like everything is normal. Can you do that? Yes. At dusk, I want you to go back to Sister Sarah's cabin. She knows things she did not tell you. She was holding back. Whatever she gives you, you bring it to me. We will decide together tonight. Yes, yes. They turned and walked back to the hollow. Henry did exactly what Holloway asked. He sat in the schoolhouse all day. He took notes for Reeve. He drank the coffee Goddard gave him. He did not look at the senior doctors any differently. Goddard nodded at him at lunchtime and asked him how he had slept. Henry said he had slept like a stone. At dusk, Henry walked along the creek toward Sister Sarah's cabin. The door was open. Sister Sarah was lying on the floor of her cabin. She was on her back. Her clear blue eyes were open and looking at the ceiling. Her hands were folded across her chest, the way someone arranges hands at a funeral. There was no blood. There was no sign of struggle. Her knitting sat on the rocking chair, unfinished. She was dead. Henry stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he stepped inside. He knelt down. He felt for the pulse at her neck. Nothing. Her skin was already cold. She had been dead for hours. He did not touch anything else. He stood up. He walked back to the schoolhouse. He found Goddard. Sister Sarah Pell is dead, he said. I went to ask her some follow-up questions. She is in her cabin. Hands folded. Goddard nodded slowly. She was 86, Henry. The mountain takes them when it takes them. Natural causes. Brother Tull will see to her. Of course, Henry said. Natural causes. He went back to his cabin. He sat on the cot. He put his face in his hands. She had died because she had spoken to him. I knew it. There was no proof. There would never be proof. But he knew it. And the senior doctors of the most respected medical society in New England were going to write down on a piece of paper that an 86-year-old woman had died of natural causes, and that piece of paper was going to be true. He stayed in the cabin until full dark. Then there was a knock. It was Brother Tull, alone, in a long black coat. He did not come in. Walk with me, doctor. Henry walked with him. They went out the west path away from the schoolhouse. Brother Tull did not speak for a long time. They walked until they were past the last cabin in a stand of laurel beside the creek. Then Brother Tull stopped. Sister Sarah told me to give you this, he said, if anything happened to her. He took something out from inside his coat. It was a book, bound in dark leather. Worn, stained, tied shut with a leather cord. This was Pastor Whitlock's journal, Tull said. I have kept it for 20 years. I have read it. I know what is in it. He wrote down everything. The dates the works were built. The name of the company. The chemicals they used. He had a friend in Pittsburgh, a chemist named Albert Heim, who tested the water from the creek and wrote out a diagram of the compounds in it. The diagram is in the book. There are letters. There are names. There is enough in this book, doctor, to bring down a great deal. Brother Tull, why are you giving me this? The pastor looked at him. In the dusk, Henry saw his face for the first time as the face of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. Because I am old, doctor. And because Sister Sarah is dead this morning. And because I will be dead too, eventually, and the next pastor will not be me, and this book will go into the ground with whoever is here to bury me. I have prayed for 20 years for a man to come who would carry it out. I prayed harder when I saw you with that child in the village 2 weeks ago, and when I saw your face after Sister Sarah told you about the smoke, and after you cut the lock of hair from that boy in the cabin. You are the man, doctor. I have decided. May God help us both if I am wrong. He pressed the book into Henry's hands. Hide it well, Tull said. Do not trust the man Halloway. Halloway is helping me. Halloway has been on 3 of these expeditions. He has signed 3 reports. He may help you tonight. He may sell you tomorrow. Don't trust anyone in your name. Brother Tull. What do you mean, anyone in your name? Tull looked at him. The dark eyes were patient and weary. I mean, doctor, that any man who carries the same titles and the same letters of recommendation as the men who are burying this story, any man who is part of that profession, that society, that brotherhood, is suspect. You are alone. Do you understand? You are alone in this. Do not trust your mentor. Do not trust your colleagues. Do not even trust the man Holloway, though he may have meant well so far. Trust this book. Trust your own eyes. Trust your wife if she is a strong woman. Trust no one else. He turned and walked back toward the hollow. Henry stood in the laurel for a long time, the book heavy in his hands. He thought about Holloway, about the gray eyes that had held his too long the first day, about the hand that had slid the handkerchief and vial back across the table, about the words I have signed every paper they have put in front of me for 20 years. Maybe Tull was right. Maybe Holloway was a man who had decided to redeem himself and would. Or maybe Holloway was a man who was steering Henry toward whatever Goddard wanted Henry steered toward. He did not know. He could not know. Not tonight. He hid the book inside his coat. He walked back to his cabin. He gathered his bag, his notebook, the 4 torn pages, the handkerchief, the vial, and the journal. He left the rest. The next morning, before the schoolhouse opened for the day's work, Henry told Goddard he had received a telegram in the night by way of Brother Tull that his son Daniel was very ill in Boston and that he had to leave at once. Goddard looked at him with the tea-colored eyes. He did not blink. Of course, Henry. Family first. Always. Take the wagon to Pine Hollow. We will see you in Boston when the work is done. And Henry. Yes, sir. Travel safely. Henry rode the wagon down out of the hollow alone. The journal was inside his coat. The handkerchief and vial were in his bag. The mountains rose behind him. He had won something. He had gotten out alive with the evidence before the senior doctors knew what he had. He had also lost something. He no longer knew who in his life he could trust. His mentor had set him up. His profession was rotten at the top. The institutions that should have protected the people of Briar Ridge had been the ones killing them slowly for 30 years. And one more thing. He did not know it yet, but Goddard had wired ahead from the telegraph office at Pine Hollow before Henry's wagon ever reached the railhead. Pemberton was waiting for him in Boston. Boston was raining when his train pulled in. Henry stepped down at South Station with his bag in one hand and the journal pressed inside his coat. He took a hansom cab home. He climbed the stairs of his apartment 3 at a time. Margaret opened the door. He did not speak. He pulled her into the apartment and held her. Daniel was asleep in the next room. The boy was not sick. He had never been sick. The telegram had been a lie Henry had told to escape the hollow. He told Margaret everything that night. Sitting at the kitchen table. Cup of tea between his hands. The hair vial on the table beside him. The handkerchief unfolded. The journal open. He told her about Sister Sarah. About the cabin door. About Holloway. About the barn at the Crowder place. About Pemberton. Margaret did not interrupt. She did not cry. When he finished, she reached across the table and took both of his hands in hers. What are you going to do, Henry? I am going to take this to Pemberton tomorrow. She looked at him for a long moment. Henry, did you not hear what you just told me? Pemberton is my friend. Pemberton chose you because you would sign. I do not believe that, Margaret. Not without hearing it from him. She looked down at the table. She let go of his hands. Be careful, she said. He went to Pemberton's office the next morning at 8. The office was on the second floor of a brownstone on Beacon Hill. Mahogany furniture, heavy books, a coal fire in the grate. Pemberton came around his desk when Henry walked in. He embraced him. He held him at arm's length. The silver hair, the kind eyes, the small smile. Henry, my boy, Goddard wired me. He said you had a family emergency. The boy is well. There was no emergency. Sit down, sir. I have to tell you what happened in that hollow. Pemberton sat down. Henry talked for an hour. He told Pemberton everything. He laid the journal on the desk. He laid the 4 torn pages beside it. He laid the handkerchief beside that. He showed the chemist's diagram. He showed the chart of age and severity. He showed the map with the circle along the creek. Pemberton listened without interrupting once. When Henry was done, Pemberton put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. After a long minute, he looked up. There were tears on his cheeks. Henry, he said, what you have done, what you have brought me, this is the work of a great doctor. So, I do not know what to do with it. Leave it with me, son. Leave all of it. I have friends in the press. I have friends in the legislature. This is too big for one man. Let me decide who to bring it to. I will tell you in 3 days. Go home to your wife. Hold your son. You have done a great service to humanity tonight. Henry was 28 years old. His mentor had pulled him into a charity clinic when he had nothing. His mentor had paid for half his medical school. His mentor was sitting across from him with tears in his eyes, calling him a great doctor. He left the journal on the desk. He went home. He told Margaret it was being handled. Margaret made a face but did not argue. They had 3 days. He played with Daniel. He kissed his wife. He did not return to the clinic. He waited. 3 days passed. On the morning of the 4th day, Henry walked back to the brownstone on Beacon Hill. He was let in by a clerk he had never seen before. He went up the stairs. He opened the door of Pemberton's office. Goddard was sitting in Pemberton's chair. The journal was on the desk. The 4 torn pages were on the desk. The handkerchief was on the desk. Pemberton was standing by the window with his back to Henry. Close the door, doctor. Ashcroft, Goddard said. Henry closed the door. His hand stayed on the knob. Sit down, please. Henry did not sit down. Suit yourself, Goddard said. Then we will be brief. Doctor, Pemberton has shown me the materials you brought him. They are an interesting collection of forgeries. We will assume for the moment that you were deceived by someone in the hollow, Brother Tull, perhaps, or the woman Pell, who had a long history of mental decline before her death, rather than that you authored them yourself. The medical examining boards of 3 states would prefer to believe you were deceived. So would the Carrollton Medical Society. So would the trustees of the Patterson Mining Company. We are all prepared to extend you that grace. Henry could not speak. All we require, Goddard said, is your signature on a brief statement which I have prepared for you, attesting that the materials in question were given to you by parties of unsound mind during your time in Briar Ridge, that you find them not credible upon further examination, and that your professional judgment of the community there is consistent with the findings of the official report of the expedition. The official report, which Dr. Pemberton will read to you in a moment, attributes the conditions of the population to centuries of consanguineous marriage in an isolated mountain community. It is, I assure you, a thorough and respected document. And if you do not sign, Dr. Ashcroft, your medical license will be revoked by the state of Massachusetts before sundown. The State Medical Examining Board of West Virginia has already filed a complaint, citing professional misconduct during the expedition. Boston will follow within the day. Your privileges at the Hanover Street Clinic will be terminated. The 2 private patients you have will be advised that you are unfit to treat them. You will not work as a doctor again. Anywhere. We are quite thorough about this. There is nowhere in this country a man can practice medicine without a license, and there is no medical board in this country that will not honor the action of another. You are 28 years old. You will spend the next 40 years of your life as a clerk. Henry looked at Pemberton. Pemberton would not look at him. And the journal, Henry said, will be destroyed this afternoon. And the people of Briar Ridge will continue to live the lives they live. Whatever poison reached them long ago. The works are closed. The damage is done. There is nothing for medicine to do for them now except describe their condition with proper humility, which the report does. You are saying it is too late to help them. I am saying it has been too late for 30 years. The only question now is what is written in the books. What is written in the books, Doctor? Ashcroft is the only thing that survives. We are choosing what survives. Henry was quiet for a very long time. No, he said. Goddard's eyes did not change. Pardon. No, I will not sign. Take the license. Goddard nodded slowly. He stood up. He gathered the papers on the desk into a leather portfolio. He took the journal. He took the handkerchief. He took the 4 torn pages. He put them all into the portfolio. He buttoned his coat. You will regret this, Henry, Pemberton said quietly from the window. He still did not turn around. Henry walked out of the office. I want you to stop here for a moment. Stay with me. Because the next part of this story is the part most people do not understand, and it is the part that matters. Most stories about a man who refuses to sign end there. The man walks out. The villains are defeated. There is a triumphant scene of him going to the newspapers. The truth comes out. Justice is done. That is not what happened to Henry Ashcroft. What happened to Henry Ashcroft was that he walked out of that office, went home, told Margaret he had refused, and they spent the next 4 months losing everything they had. His license was revoked by sundown, exactly as Goddard had said. The 2 private patients he had were sent letters the next morning warning them that he had been removed from the medical register. The Hanover Street Clinic terminated him by the end of the week. The board of the clinic told him privately they had been threatened with the loss of their charity status if they kept him. Henry walked out of the clinic carrying his medical bag in one hand and a small box of personal effects in the other, and the woman at the front desk would not meet his eyes. He went to a journalist, a man named William Carney. Carney wrote for the Boston Globe *. He had broken stories on factory conditions in Lawrence. He had broken stories on the sweatshops in the South End. He was the kind of man Henry thought might listen. Henry told him the whole story. He showed him the carbon copies of his notes. Yes, he had made carbon copies before he handed the originals to Pemberton, because Margaret had told him to, and Margaret had been right. He showed Carney the chart, the map. He told Carney about Sister Sarah, about the journal, about Pemberton and Goddard, about the State Medical Examining Board of West Virginia, about the Patterson Mining Company. Carney listened. Carney took notes. Carney told Henry he would investigate. Carney shook his hand and told him to be careful. 8 days later, William Carney was found dead in his apartment with a pistol in his hand and a note on the desk saying he was tired of life and wished his sister well incent. Loy. The Asterisk Globe ran a half-column obituary on page 7. There was no mention of Briar Ridge. There was no mention of Patterson Mining. The notes Henry had given him had been removed from his apartment before the police arrived. The next day, a man followed Margaret home from the market. He did not approach her. He did not speak to her. He walked half a block behind her all the way from Hanover Street to their apartment door. When she turned to look at him, he tipped his hat and kept walking. Margaret was a strong woman. I told you that. She came inside, closed the door, locked it, and walked into the kitchen and was sick into the basin. Henry sent Daniel to her sister's house in Concord that night. He sent Margaret with him. He told them to stay there for 2 weeks. Margaret did not want to go. He made her go. He stayed alone in the apartment. He sat at the kitchen table that night with the carbon copies of his notes in front of him. He had a fire going in the small stove. He had a glass of whiskey at his elbow. He had not eaten in 2 days. He thought about burning the notes. This is the hardest moment, the part of the story where the man almost loses. He thought about it for a long time. He thought about what would happen if he simply signed the statement Goddard had asked for. They would give him back his license. He could keep practicing. Margaret would come home. Daniel would have a father with a profession. The world would forget the way the world always forgets. He would forget too. He would tell himself after a few years that perhaps the materials had been forgeries after all. Perhaps Sister Sarah had been confused. Perhaps the boy in the cabin had been a freak of nature and not the consequence of a poison. He would say it to himself in the morning. He would say it to himself at night. After a long enough time, he would believe it. He took the notes off the table. He held them above the open door of the stove. The heat reached up to his hands. He stood there a long time. Then he set the notes down on the table. He did not burn them. Instead, he went to his bedroom, took out a fresh notebook from the drawer, sat down at the kitchen table, and started to write. He wrote everything. He wrote it in a clear hand. He wrote it slowly. He wrote his interview with Sister Sarah from memory, word for word, the way she had said it. He wrote the description of the cabin and the child without trying to spare himself the words. He wrote the meeting at the barn, the names Cole and Bannister, the conversation Halloway had reported to him. He wrote the scene in Pemberton's office. He wrote the death of William Carney. He wrote the man who had followed Margaret. He wrote the names of every senior doctor on the expedition. All 18 of them. He wrote every detail of the chemist's diagram he could remember. He wrote what he believed the compound was. Arsenic, mercury, a residue of the smelting process used in copper extraction in that part of the country in the 1870s. The works at the head of the valley had been a copper smelter. He had figured that out on the train ride home. He wrote for 3 days. He stopped only to eat and sleep. He wrote with a fountain pen Margaret had given him on their wedding day. He used black ink. He filled 3 bottles of it. His hand cramped. He soaked it in cold water and kept writing. There were moments when he had to stop because his eyes blurred from tears, and moments when he had to stop because he was so angry he could not see the page. He worked through both. When he was done, he had a manuscript of 212 pages. He made 3 copies. He spent 2 weeks on it. He copied it out twice in his own hand on different paper, and once he had a young typist in Cambridge type up a 3rd copy. He did not tell the typist what it was. He paid her in cash. He told her it was a novel. He hid the 3 copies in 3 places. The first he gave to Margaret's sister in Concord, sealed in an oilcloth packet, with instructions to open it only if Henry was killed. The second he sent by mail to a colleague from medical school, a man named Dr. Wilfred Kane, who was practicing in San Francisco. He sent it without a return address, with a letter explaining what it was and asking Kane to hold it. The third he kept himself. He did not go to the newspapers. He had learned that lesson. He moved his family. They sold the apartment. Margaret's sister loaned them money. They went to a small town in upstate New York, a place called Halford's Crossing. Population 1,050. Henry took the medical examination of New York State under his own name and passed it. The Medical Board of New York did not yet have the file from West Virginia. By the time Goddard's network found him in New York 3 years later, Henry had made himself indispensable to the town. The mayor's wife was his patient. The local judge was his patient. The man who owned the bank was his patient. When the State Medical Examining Board of New York received the complaint from West Virginia in 1906, the bank president quietly made a phone call, and the complaint was filed and forgotten. Henry practiced medicine in Halford's Crossing for 44 years. He never wrote another word about Briar Ridge in public. He never told Daniel what was in the manuscript. He never told the friends he made in town. He set bones. He delivered babies. He stitched wounds. He buried patients. He grew old. But here is the part nobody saw. Every year, on the anniversary of the day he had stood in the doorway of that cabin in the hollow, he took the manuscript out of the wall of his house and read it through. Front to back, 212 pages. He read it the way a man rereads scripture. To remember, to not let the years and the comfort and the quiet town and the patients and the new house and the grandchildren who came along soften what he had seen. He also wrote under a pen name a series of essays for a small medical journal in Philadelphia. 3 of them over the course of the 1920s. The essays were technical. They discussed industrial heavy metal exposure in mountain populations. They were unsigned, attributed to a country physician. Nobody read them. Nobody noticed them. But Henry knew they existed. He had pushed something into the world. Small, but real. In 1947, when he was 72 years old, he sealed the manuscript into a tin box. He had built the house himself after the war, after Daniel had grown up and moved to New Jersey. He knew the walls. He knew which one ran behind the bookshelf in his study. He pried the bookshelf out one Saturday afternoon. He cut a hole in the lath and plaster. He put the tin box inside the wall between 2 studs. He sealed the box first with wax and then with tar. He nailed a piece of cedar over the opening. He patched the plaster. He repainted the wall. He pushed the bookshelf back against the wall. He stood for a long time with his hand pressed flat against the painted wood. "Someone will find you," he said quietly. "Someone will find you." He turned and walked out of the room. Henry Ashcroft died in his sleep on the 11th of March, 1951. He was 76 years old. His heart simply stopped during the night. Margaret found him in the morning. The funeral was held at the small Episcopal church in Halford's Crossing. 200 people came. The mayor spoke. The judge spoke. The bank president, very old by then, spoke last and said only that doctor. Ashcroft had been the most steady man he had ever known. Margaret lived another 9 years in the house Henry had built. She died in 1960. Daniel inherited the house. Daniel was an engineer in New Jersey by then, with a wife and 3 children of his own, and the house in Halford's Crossing was a place he visited twice a year and could not afford to keep up. In 1965, he sold it to a young schoolteacher and his wife who had just moved to town. Daniel took some of the furniture. He took the photographs from the mantel. He did not look behind the bookshelf in his father's study because he had no reason to. He had not known there was anything there to find. The schoolteacher and his wife lived in the house for 24 years. They raised 3 daughters there. The oldest daughter took the room that had been Henry's study and turned it into a bedroom. The bookshelf came down. The plaster patch held. The cedar piece behind it stayed quiet. 3 different decades of wallpaper went up over the wall. None of the daughters ever heard of Briar Ridge. In 1989, the schoolteacher died of a heart attack. His widow sold the house and moved to Florida. The next owners were a couple named Martin, who ran a small antique business out of the front room. They were in the house from 1989 to 2014. They restored some of the woodwork. They did not touch the wall in the small study. They retired to North Carolina and sold the house to a young family with 2 small boys. In 2024, that family decided the house needed a structural assessment. The roof was sagging. Some of the beams in the attic were soft. They wanted to know if it was worth saving or whether they should sell and move on. They hired an architectural historian out of Albany. The historian's name was Naomi Ashcroft. Yes, Ashcroft. Same name. Naomi was 34 years old. She had a doctorate in architectural history from Cornell. Her father had been an engineer in New Jersey, the son of a man named Daniel Ashcroft who had grown up in upstate New York and rarely talked about it. Naomi had met her great-grandfather only once, in a photograph her grandmother kept on a mantelpiece. A serious old man with steady eyes. She had never been told much about him. He had been a country doctor. He had been quiet. He had built the house he died in. That was all. But there was one detail, passed down through her grandmother to her mother to her, that had always stayed with Naomi. Her grandmother had told her when Naomi was a child that her great-grandfather had once said, "If anyone in this family ever finds something I have written that they did not expect to find, they should not throw it away. They should write it." Naomi had remembered that sentence her whole life. She had not known what to do with it. Naomi had spent the last 4 years working on a side project. A research project that had nothing to do with her job. She had been quietly tracking a series of essays published in a small Philadelphia medical journal in the 1920s, written by an unsigned author who called himself a country physician. 3 essays on heavy metal exposure in isolated mountain populations. The essays cited specific symptoms. They cited specific compounds. They cited a copper smelter operation in West Virginia by the name of the company, Patterson, and they did so in 1923, decades before any official record of that company's environmental impact existed. She had become obsessed with the question of who had written them. She had narrowed the candidates to a list of 7 country physicians active in the Northeast in the 1920s. One of them was a man named Henry Ashcroft of Halford's Crossing, New York. Her own great-grandfather. She had been planning a trip to Halford's Crossing for 6 months to look at his old patient records, if any existed. Then a young family she had never met called her office and asked her to assess their house at 47 Cedar Lane. "Stay with me here, because I want you to feel how this happened." She did not go looking for the manuscript. The manuscript came looking for her. Out of all the architectural historians in upstate New York, the family hired the one with that name. The one who already had her great-grandfather on a list of suspects. The one who had been told as a child to read whatever she might find. Henry Ashcroft had hidden his manuscript in 1947. He had told the wall, "someone will find you." He could not have known it would be his own great-granddaughter. He could not have known she would be exactly the right person, with exactly the right knowledge, at exactly the right moment. But that is what happened. Some stories are like that. They wait for the right reader. She drove up on a cold morning in October. She parked in the driveway. She stepped out of the car and looked at the house. She felt the hair on the back of her neck rise. She had never been there before. She knew as surely as she had ever known anything that she had come home. The young couple showed her around. The boys ran ahead of them. She measured the beams in the attic. She checked the foundation. She walked through every room with her notebook in her hand. Then she came to the small study at the back of the second floor. The wall behind the bookshelf was slightly bowed. She noticed it. She did not say anything about it to the owners. She finished the tour, gave the couple a preliminary verdict: the house was sound, restoration was possible, and asked if she could come back the next day to do a closer interior survey. The next day she came alone with a stud finder and a small pry bar. The bookshelf moved out easily. The wall behind it had been patched. 3 layers of wallpaper. Underneath, a cedar piece. Underneath that, an opening in the lath and plaster. Inside the opening, a tin box sealed in tar. She carried it out to her car. She drove home to Albany. She set the box on her kitchen table. She sat in front of it for a long time. Then she opened it. The manuscript was in perfect condition. The tar had held. The wax had held. 212 pages in a clear hand, in black ink on cream paper. She read it through that night. She did not sleep. By dawn, she had finished it. She sat at her kitchen table with her great-grandfather's words in her hands, and she cried for an hour. Then she got up, made coffee, and got to work. Now here is what happened next. I am going to tell you because this is the part that matters. Naomi Ashcroft did not go to a major newspaper. She had read her great-grandfather's account of William Carney. She knew that history. She did not trust large institutions to handle a story this big without losing pieces of it. Instead, she did 3 things at once. She made digital copies. She uploaded them to 4 separate cloud services and to 2 physical hard drives that she gave to 2 different friends in 2 different states. She made photographic facsimiles of every page. She backed everything up. Then she contacted 3 independent investigative journalists who specialized in environmental and corporate history reporting. She gave each of them a copy of the manuscript at the same time, with one condition. They were to verify the contents themselves before publishing, and if they did publish, they were to publish on the same day. Then she contacted the descendants of Briar Ridge. There were still descendants. Of course there were. The hollow had not vanished. The town of Briar Ridge, West Virginia, had a population of about 380 people in 2024. The deformities had not disappeared with the closing of the smelter. They had attenuated, generation by generation, as the mercury and arsenic and lead worked their slow way out of the soil and the water and the bodies. But they had not gone away. There were still children born in that hollow with hands that did not form right. There were still adults whose hearing had been bad since infancy. There were still families who could trace, if anyone had ever asked them to, a clear line back to the works at the head of the valley. Naomi went to Briar Ridge in November of 2024. She brought the manuscript. She met with the elders of the community. She read them the chapter on Sister Sarah Pell. She watched them weep. The story broke on January the 8th, 2025. 3 independent outlets. Same day. The Patterson Mining Company had become Patterson Industries, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with operations in 28 countries. Their lawyers were ready by 10 that morning. Their statement was on every business news network by noon. They denied everything. It did not matter. The chemist's diagram from Albert Heim, reproduced in Henry's manuscript, was matched within 2 weeks against the chemical signatures still present in soil samples from the hollow. The diagram was correct. The compounds were correct. The story stood up. Independent academic teams verified it. The medical schools that had once been part of the Carrollton Medical Society, most of them long since absorbed into larger universities, issued formal apologies. The state of West Virginia opened an investigation. The descendants of Briar Ridge filed a class action lawsuit in March of 2025. The lawsuit is, as of this telling, still working its way through the courts. It will take years. The settlement, when it comes, will be the largest in American history for an environmental injury caused by a single industrial site. But the lawsuit is not the point of this story. The point of this story is the small things. The point of this story is that 19 doctors stood in a doorway in 1903. 18 of them turned away. They went back to Boston. They signed a report that was a lie. They wore the gold watches and the silver canes, and they sat at the heads of medical societies, and they died in their beds with their reputations intact. Their names are still on the buildings of certain medical schools. Goddard Hall at one of them. Pemberton Library at another. Reeve Lecture in Anatomy at a third. The names are still there. The descendants of those 18 men are alive today. Most of them are decent people. Most of them did not know. The ones who have spoken to the press since the story broke have all said variations of the same thing. We did not know, we are sorry, we will help make this right. I believe them. But one doctor did not turn away. One doctor came home and lost everything. One doctor wrote 212 pages in a clear hand and sealed them inside a wall and waited 121 years for someone to find them. Now here is the part where I am supposed to give you the lesson. The wise sentence. The line that ties everything together. Henry himself wrote that line in the last paragraph of his manuscript. I am going to read it to you exactly as he wrote it. Stay with me for one more minute. He wrote, I do not know who will find this. I do not know when. I have done what I could. I have written down what I saw. I have hidden it where the dust will not reach it, and where the men who would burn it cannot reach it either. The truth is a small thing, kept by small people in small places, and the powerful know it, and that is why they spend so much money to keep it small. But a small thing kept long enough becomes the only thing that lasts. They will be forgotten. The works at the head of the valley will be forgotten. The expedition will be forgotten. The signatures on the report will be forgotten. What I have written here will be remembered by someone eventually. That is enough. That has always been enough. Naomi had that paragraph framed. It hangs in her office in Albany. Underneath it, in a smaller frame, she has placed Sister Sarah Pell's tea-stained handkerchief. Yes, the handkerchief. Henry had recovered it from Holloway's table the night the brandy was dosed, and it had survived in the tin box with the manuscript. The crystalline ring of arsenic salts is still visible along the edge. Naomi has been to Briar Ridge 4 times since the story broke. The community has welcomed her. They asked her on her second visit if she would speak at the dedication of a small memorial they were planning in the hollow. She said yes. The memorial was unveiled in October of 2025. It is a simple stone marker set beside the creek where Sister Sarah's cabin once stood. The names of the children of the hollow, all of them from 1873 forward, as far as the records can be reconstructed, are carved into it. There are 407 names. Above the names at the top of the stone is a single sentence. It is the only thing carved larger than the names. It reads, "They knew. We know now." Naomi stood at that dedication. She read out the last paragraph of her great-grandfather's manuscript. She did not weep. She had wept enough for one lifetime. The crowd was small, about 120 people. Most of them descendants. Some of them in wheelchairs. Some of them children, the great-great-great-grandchildren of the families Henry had examined in the schoolhouse in 1903. The cleft palates were rare now. The fused fingers were rare now. The damage in the soil had thinned across 5 generations, the way a poison eventually does, slow and patient and never quite gone. When she finished, an old woman from the hollow walked up to her. The woman was 81. Her hands were twisted from a kind of arthritis that was not really arthritis. She put one of those hands against Naomi's cheek. "He came back," the old woman said. "Your grandfather. He came back. Through you. He came back." Naomi held the woman's hand against her face for a long time. The wind moved in the trees above them, the same trees that had been there in 1903, the same trees that had stood over the wagons coming up the path with 19 doctors in them. The creek moved along beside them, the same creek that had carried the smelter's poison down the valley for a decade, the same creek that had cleared again, slowly, after the works were closed. Everything in that hollow had a long memory. The land had remembered. The people had remembered. And now, finally, the country had been forced to remember too. That is the end of the story. Or it is one ending. There will be more. There always are when something has been buried this long. The lawsuit will deliver its verdict. Patterson Industries will or will not survive it. The names on the medical school buildings will or will not be removed. Other manuscripts sealed in other walls in other towns will or will not be found. But the part that matters is already done. A young doctor stood in a doorway in 1903 and saw something he was not supposed to see. He carried it home. He paid for it. He wrote it down. He hid it. He waited. And 121 years later, a young woman who shared his name pried a bookshelf away from a wall in a small house in upstate New York, and the truth that 19 doctors had buried walked back out into the light. Stay with that for a second. The powerful spend millions to bury what they do not want known. They have always done it. They will keep doing it. The medical board, the company, the mentor, the silver-tipped cane, these things are real. They are not theatrical villains. They will be there tomorrow morning in different clothes with different names doing the same thing. But there is also Henry. Quiet, stubborn, 28 years old in the photograph on Naomi's desk. A printer's son from Boston who would not sign. What a single man preserves, time will always find a way to speak. That is what those 19 doctors saw in Briar Ridge in 1903. That is what 18 of them tried to bury. That is what one of them refused to. And now you know it too. Tell someone.